Hello and welcome to the Actual Tech Media Expert Series. My name is Scott Becker. I'm from Actual Tech Media, and I'm excited to be your moderator for this special event on the layers of defense in a comprehensive security strategy. Now, before we get to today's great content, we do have a few housekeeping items that will help you get the most out of this session. First off, we want this to be an informative event for you, so we encourage any questions in the questions box in our webinar control panel. Not only will we have team members responding to questions during the live event, but we'll also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation, where we'll discuss in greater detail some of the top questions that come in. That Q&A panel is also the place to just say hello, which a lot of you have been doing already. We love to hear where you're logging in from. And it's also the place to let us know if we can help in the unlikely event you have any technical issues. A browser refresh is going to fix most of those issues, but if that doesn't work, just let us know in the Q&A and we'll provide some technical assistance. At the end of the webinar event, we will be awarding a $300 Amazon gift card to one lucky registrant. Of course, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for the prize. The official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found in your handout section. You'll just scroll to the bottom and you'll find the prize terms and conditions link there. Now, these Expert Series events are special product-neutral looks at pressing technology problems presented by an expert in the field, but the support of our sponsors make it possible for us to bring you this content. So we want to give a special shout out to all those sponsors who are making today's event possible. So over the next few slides, I'm going to share some messages from our sponsors today, and they'll refer to links that you can find in the handout section of your console at any time during the presentation. As always, the handout section also has a few valuable Actual Tech Media links. There's a link to the Gorilla Guide Book Club, where you can get access to our great printed resources on technology topics. There's also a link to the ATM Event Center, which has our calendar of upcoming events, including another Expert Series event next week on ransomware. Now, before we get into the main presentation, a few words from our sponsors. We're supported by CrowdStrike. CrowdStrike stops breaches by allowing you to gain insights, get ahead of adversaries, and learn how to fight cybercrime. They've provided a ransomware white paper called Tales from the Dark Web that shows how cybercriminals monitor or monetize ransomware attacks, and you can find that in your handouts section. Today's event is also sponsored by Rubrik. And Rubrik has provided the Zero Trust Data Security for Dummies book. So, to combat the reality of the increasing volume of ransomware attacks, the Zero Trust Data Security model was developed based on the idea that no one is trustworthy. No user, no application, no device. Discover how the Zero Trust Data Security architecture can improve your security posture and fortify your defenses against modern cyber threats. We are also sponsored by Attack IQ. You can't fix what you can't see. Find the cracks in your infrastructure, batten down the hatches, and protect yourself from cyber attacks with the Attack IQ Security Control Validation Platform. You can learn more at attackiq.com. Today's event is also sponsored by Duo. Duo is a cloud-based security platform that protects access to all applications for any user and device from anywhere. It's designed to be easy to use, administer, and deploy while providing complete endpoint visibility and control. This combination of user and device trust builds the foundation for a zero-trust security model. Start your free Duo trial today at signup.duo.com. And finally, we are sponsored by Sequence Security, Unified API Protection. Sequence provides a continuous IPA protection lifecycle, which you can see here in the loop. It starts with discovery, where you can identify all public-facing APIs. Moves on to inventory, which provides unified inventory of all APIs. Goes to compliance, where you can ensure adherence to security and governance best practices. Moves on to detection, where you can detect attacks as they happen. Then prevention, block attacks natively in real time. And finally, testing, so you can secure new APIs before they go live. You can sign up for your free assessment at sequence.ai/assessment. And actually, there's a little bit more on there about partner F equals ATM. Just go ahead and click on there. And also, you can find that in your handouts section. So once again, take advantage of that handout section where you can find all the links that you've just seen. And with that, let's get to today's fantastic content. It's my pleasure to introduce you to our presenter today, Evgeniy Kharam. Evgeniy has fantastic experience and expertise on a broad range of security issues. As VP for Solution Architecture at the Herjavec Group, he's been involved in implementations for customers on a broad range of security deployments and helping them with security problems. And then as the co-founder of the Security Architecture podcast, he does deep interviews with vendors on his podcast and covers a lot of security topics. We've also got a link to that podcast in the handout section as well if you'd like to check that podcast out. And now I'm going to turn it over to Evgeniy.
Hello everyone, welcome, thank you for the introduction. I'm very, very happy to be here today to talk about the layer of defense. Let me just quickly share my screen and we go from there. Great. So we're going to talk about layer of defense today. There's quite a lot of things to talk about it, and I will do my best to go as quickly as possible. It's just because we have limited time and I can literally talk about it for the entire day. Let's start. Doesn't want to move. Okay, much better right now. My name is Evgeniy. I and Dimitri created a podcast around 2 years ago. It's called Security Architecture Podcast. Both of us spent quite a lot of time in the industry. Let me move myself a bit to the side. It's going to be much better. Here we go. And we have a lot of knowledge how to protect customers, how to protect environments. And I want to share today with you some of the things that I think are important, some of the tools, some of the layers that are important in IT security. This is the agenda for today. We're going to cover several different things. We're going to talk about defense in depth. We're going to talk about the corporate IT security, of course the layers, how they connect together, some of the control frameworks because they're important, definitely security governance and metrics as well a bit. So let's get started. What is corporate security? I want to have a differential here. Corporate security is what secured the corporate. We're not talking about securing the website and going towards your customers. We're talking about securing what's happening in the company, your email environment, your servers, your databases in some cases. How do you access the internet? How do you operate day by day? This is the part that I refer to corporate security. Maybe even databases are more another part, but still very important as well. And there's quite a lot of tools here. You will see that there's a lot of things that are happening here, and sometimes it's very confusing. Similar to a house, defense in depth is when we have different layers of protection, but every layer doing something else. If you think about the house, and I do like references and ideas and similar ideas in my presentation, doing something else. We have a drywall, we have systems that protect the isolation, the waterproofing, the noise, and they all built from a different material. Same as in our security practice. We create, we build, we layer different tools when every tool will do something else and have a bit different purpose. What I want to show is some of the ideas and some of the tools we're going to talk about it today right now. This is just a bit of a arrow history about different tools. Guess what? This is not all the tools. There is many more tools that exist in the enterprise. I'll do my best to cover them as quickly as possible, but still explain to you what's happening and why all of them are important. The reason why they're important because if you look on the modern trend landscape, there is a lot of different attacks, and every attack may involve one or two or three or four different layers of your security stack. And you will need all the different layers to make sure you're protecting the company, you're protecting the company asset. In some cases, you're not just protecting, you also need the detection part, or proactively understand there is a problem. Is there a new SQL injection happening, for example? You know there's a new vulnerability. You don't need to wait until it's happened. You can proactively go scan and understand. This is why we build all the tools. This is why we want to be creating our security program in layers. This is why we want to be proactive. This is why we want to be reactive as well and do all this many different things. Let's go and jump to layer defense. a bit history. I like to jump in history. I like to show what happened in the past and where we are right now. In the 1990s, this is literally how we work. ISP router, internal router switch, and the network. Wide open. Very, very easy. Nobody troubled with anything. Very quickly we introduced the firewall. The stateful firewall, Cisco's checkpoint in the beginning, was basically helping to understand what to let in and what to let out. There was many different protocols. Not everything was HTTP as it is right now, but it was the beginning. Very quickly we understand there's more things happening, but before that I want to talk about statistics. Look at what happened this time. The average cost of breach was like $1,500, $2,500. Right now we're talking about millions. The firewall costs $15,000. Right now we're talking about $200, $300, $400,000 for a firewall or for enterprise level device to protect your environment. And if you of course look on the speed, it's kind of funny. Your cell phone your cell phone is much faster than the firewalls that we were talking about in 1997. And in some cases it may cost even more as well. And it probably means that the cell phone you have right now will able to be the firewall 20 years ago. Just some statistics. And it also can explain to you that the fastest the links, the bigger the devices we need, the more throughput, the more horsepower, the more capacity we need as well. Very quickly we introduced the idea of intrusion prevention system. It's a system that will be smart to understand what's happening more. The firewall idea is basically deny everything until I allow. The IPS idea is quite different. I'm by default allowing the traffic, and I'm only going to block the traffic that is malicious. You probably heard the idea of IDS and IPS, and some people refer this in a different ways, but there's actually a very significant and kind of straightforward explanation why they're different. Some fun fact about IPS. This is 2002, so this is 20 years ago. SANS claims that potentially IPS is the silver bullet, even so it's not really right now, but 20 years ago we were thinking it will be the holy grail and it will fix everything we need and we don't need any other tools. So let's quickly explain about the difference between IDS and IPS, because it's a very, very important, and it's actually also a reference to many other tools. IDS, in a way, like a small dog, it's barking, but doesn't do anything. IPS is a much bigger dog, not just barking, can also do stuff. The potential here and the focus and the stress is on the D and on the P. D is detection, P is protection. The D part means that it's only detecting. It doesn't actually can do anything. And this is going to be referred to EDR, endpoint detection, NDR, network detection tools as well. When you hear the D part, you need to be thinking like, oh, I can understand what's happening. I can listen to what's happening, but I cannot actually practically do something. There is ways to do it in a different, like I can do an API call that we'll talk about them later on, how we can connect all this together. But by definition, by itself, the IDS part cannot do anything, and the IPS part is there. And it's also going to be deployed differently. We'll talk about this a bit later on. Let's talk about URL filtering. I don't know if you know, but the entire idea of URL filtering started in 2000s under Child Internet Protection Act. They basically declare that all the public schools and libraries have to implement URL filtering, and you probably heard about products like WebSense, Blue Code, that were the beginning of this era, McAfee later on as well, Symantec, to protect schools and block pornography and block other sites like gambling for the kids. It's of course completely different right now. There's entire other presentations that can explain more about where we are with this. But URL filtering, this is where it started, and of course it's moved to many different things right now, like blocking malware sites, blocking sites that are only started a couple of days ago, domains, for example. There's a very important practice in my mind to do correct URL filtering, and we even have brand new category right now of not devices, of browsers, enterprise browsers that can do the URL filtering inside the browser. Think about this. The moment you hire a new person, you give them a browser that will contain a lot of functionality we're talking right now inside the browser. And only by having this browser, they were able to connect to your environment. Anti-spam, very popular topic. It started basically as people sending spam, try to sell you some drugs you don't need, or redirect you to sites you don't need. but very quickly move and escalated right now as one of the main point of malware delivery. Majority of the attacks right now happening when you receive an email, you click on something, you receive a picture, you click on the picture, you receive a document, you click on this. So anti-spam and email, it is one of the fundamental security controls in my mind and very, very important to have in your environment. As everything in the industry, there's a lot of movement and changes the way we can implement anti-spam from architecture perspective. In the beginning, it was only with the MX record, so the email device will have to be somewhere where the email will have to flow through it. Right now, we see a new approach using APIs by connecting to Office 365, by connecting to Gmail to understand what's happening with the email on the side without actually taking the email itself and be made in the middle. So very, very interesting, a lot of innovation in the space. I'm very, very intrigued about where it's going to take us in the future. Next generation firewalls, this is basically an iteration of the firewalls. We had the firewalls and we had something called UTM devices, Unified Threat Management, and next generation firewalls is what we all know and use right now. They collapse majority of the security controls. I spoke about them before, maybe we said anti-spam. They do URL filtering, they have the IPS, they also integrate application control, they also have something I call user identity, very important part because the majority of the new frameworks right now, the new ways to control people is not by IP, is by user. Everything pretty much is related to your identity. We'll talk about identity a bit later. So next-generation firewalls have to understand who you are, what you do, and what kind of policy allow you to do. If you're not familiar with the next-gen firewalls, this is one of the fundamental parts, why they're important. In the beginning of the days, companies understood that a lot of tools people want to introduce in the company, so they blocked all the ports beside HTTP and later on HTTPS for people to let to browse. So companies like Skype, BitTorrent, and many other vendors decided, okay, why would I use a proprietary protocol because I know it may be blocked? I'll use HTTP, HTTPS because I know the firewalls will allow it. So by having a next generation firewall, I right now can understand and look inside HTTP and understand what is this application is doing. It's also related to shadow IT right now because a lot of companies doing this as well. We'll talk a bit about shadow IT a bit later. But understanding the protocol, I can create sanction apps, I can understand what you're doing, and I can control what you can do even more. And you may think about this, oh, but not really in the office all the time right now. What do I do about this? We'll touch base later on how I can expand the perimeter. Some people say there's no more perimeter. I think in my mind, perimeter is everywhere, but we'll definitely touch base on this topic later on as well. Important part of the inline inspection, like the firewalls, like the IPS, is the SSL inspection. You'll be surprised, 5-6 years ago, we spoke about 20 or 30% of the internet being encrypted. With Chrome and Edge, forcing people to encrypt more, and other companies as well, like Mozilla. Right now, I believe we're talking something about 89% of the traffic being encrypted. So if you company that has IPSs, firewall, next generation firewalls, SASEs that we'll discuss later on, and you're not encrypting SSL traffic to look inside the tunnel, you're missing out. You're missing out on many different things. You may say and claim, but there is other problems, not always easy to decrypt. I need to talk to HR. I don't know how to distribute certificates. It can be done. It's a process. It takes a bit of time, but it's definitely achievable. Let's move on and talk about more elevated part like APT, Advanced Persistent Threat. We understand that not all the malware are very, very easy to detect. And for the last several years, many bad guys, hackers, and whatever you want to call them, understood that we can create a sophisticated malware that will not unveil itself right away, that will make time, that may only unveil itself if it has central language, for example, or will not unveil itself if a certain language exists. We actually saw several malwares last year when it will not be doing anything if you have a Russian keyboard, as an example. or it will see and understand what kind of laptops you are. This way we have sandboxing. Sandboxing is a type of device or appliance or virtual machine that will let the malware sit. In majority of the cases, it will escalate and around the clock very fast to let the malware to understand what's happening. It creates an environment to understand what's happening and see if the particular file is malicious or not. This way, when you download the file or there's a file in your environment you don't know or you don't familiar with the hash, you can run it through the sandbox environment to have an additional control, additional way to understand what's happening with this file. It's been used very popular in many different vendors and environments to do this work. And I think it's great to have them. Right now, we see companies like VirusTotal, of course, part of Google, that you can put a hash there and they will let you know what's happening. But many other inline networks use such technique to understand what's happening with the files to be much smarter and not just let go any files into the environment. Even so, they probably already have a very, very big database of files, and then they only going to run the sandbox via the files for the files they don't know. Also, the APT part and sandboxing, not just sandboxing files, but they will monitor the connections and they will create almost like a behavior part to understand what's happening. And we'll talk about behavior a bit less as well, because we're almost building like a building block. All these things collapse to 1, 2, 3 different technologies that we see a lot of, not collapsing, we see a lot of vendors right now trying to put all the technologies under one umbrella. We definitely have to talk about AV, EDR, or EPP. If you're not familiar with the EPP, is the advention, is the protection part, and EDR is the detection part. The AV, we're pretty much not calling AV anymore. It's called next-gen AV or EPP, endpoint protection, EDR, endpoint detection and response. You know there's many, many different vendors in the space like CrowdStrike, SentinelOne, and many others that are playing in the space and doing an amazing job to help us to protect our laptops. If you don't know about the history, the big idea from the old generation and the new generation endpoint protection is they're no longer relying on signatures, they're relying more on behavior. They don't need a very big file, or what we call DAT, with the signatures to download. In some cases, it could be 300 or 400 megabytes for the file. It means the agents themselves are very, very nimble, and they don't consume a lot of CPU on your laptop as well. Majority of them running out of the cloud from the management perspective, and majority of the vendors, this is the way they work and help you to protect your environment as another layer of defense after anti-spam, network detection, IPS, firewalling. So think about it, like if it passed the firewall, if it passed the anti-spam, then it will get to the endpoint, the endpoint will detect as well. And we'll talk later on how all these things can be also connected to each other. So I think endpoint is definitely important, and especially in days when people are not working in the office and they're traveling everywhere as well. Remember in the beginning I mentioned about how can I be proactive. Vulnerability management is one of these tools that we have identified a vulnerability in Microsoft, in Adobe or somewhere else. I can use vulnerability management to scan my environment and see if I have such vulnerabilities. It doesn't mean that I scan the environment only when I have vulnerabilities. I actually scan the environment all the time, and vulnerability is happening, I can check with the management and see what's going on. In the past, majority of the vulnerability scanners use network scanning, and we slowly see a very big migration from vulnerability scanning on the network part to host-based vulnerability scanning. It means I can deploy an agent similar to EDR or EPP. It will sit on my laptop and actually continuously scan what's happening with my endpoint. And this continuous security is the new normal. This is where we're going. We don't want a periodic scanning. We don't want a periodic protection. We want a protection all the time, scanning all the time. So with combination of vulnerability scanning and EDR, EPP, we have another layer of protection here as well. You probably heard a lot about DLP, or data loss prevention. What do I do? How do I know which document I can share or cannot share? PCI compliance, credit card information, PII, personal identifying information. What I do with it? DLP been around for a very, very long time, but there was quite an involved process on how I can maintain it, how can I manage it, and what is the performance hit on my environment. And DLP will be deployed across network, email, endpoint, scanning as well, and cloud. So there's multiple places where I can put DLP, and I can also do discovery. I can scan my environment to understand what kind of files, what kind of PII information I have in my environment, and what kind of files I have in my environment. And I call DLP a process because there's quite a lot of things to do. I need to classify my data. I need to understand what I can share, what I cannot share. How I will decide if this document is internal, public, or maybe secret. For example, if I took a picture of my cat, it's probably a public document. If I send a document that explains some of my customer information, it's probably an internal document. Now, a very classified document could be an information about potential M&A for the company. It means it's not just internal that everybody can see it. It means it can only be seen by number of people in the company. And there is a definition between this, and it's usually part of the policy creation to explain what can be done. Then templates applied on documents and files as well. And later on, I use security controls to stop such documents. Think about this. A bad guy was able to get into the environment and trying to get files out of the environment. But because it's classified, or maybe even encrypted, they cannot take them. So in case of classification, they try to take the files out, but the security control will stop them. Or if they encrypted, more about document security, they're able to take the files out, but they cannot do anything with these files. I personally believe DLP in document security will be one of the main security controls in the future. We're not fully there, but there's quite a lot of work that can be done to make it better. Remember when we spoke about IDS and IPS? So IDS and IPS can look for different attacks. Majority of them are signature. Remember how I spoke about ATP, the advanced part? With network breach detection, NTA, NBA, NDR, NTA network threat analysis, NBA network behavior analysis, NDR network detection and response, these tools designed to watch the traffic. They usually deploy on a mirror or at a top port in your environment. It means you are mirroring, copying of the traffic of the environment to one particular place, and then a device watching this traffic and slowly creating a behavior, what Evgeniy is doing when Evgeniy is logging in, how many files Evgeniy usually copy, what kind of devices Evgeniy is usually logging to or working with. So by creating a pattern, and in most cases, people will claim they're going to use ML or AI to have the patterns created better, I can now understand if Evgeniy is now trying to do something that is not very Evgeniy. Like for example, Evgeniy usually log in and go to FTP server 1 and 2, go into Outlook, go into SharePoint, maybe some kind of database. But today he went to a completely different database. He logged in from location he usually don't log in. He downloaded a lot of information as well. So it may indicate that something happened with Evgeniy. And this is where the market is going. You probably heard about XDR. I don't want to go to XDR because there's still a lot of talk what's XDR exactly. But NTA, NBA, NDR, the network, the behavior part is very important part of XDR in my mind. Happy to talk about it in a different presentation, but today we just leave it on this. It is an important security control that exists in the environment and will still be used. It's also doing it differently on the endpoint and in the cloud, but it's one of the fundamentals, one, to create the behavior about what you're doing. I want to quickly mention IAM, Identity Access Management. And then when I spoke about next generation firewalling, I was talking about how it's important to know who you are and from where you're coming. This is also very important to the identity part. So how do I control the identity? Where do I create users? How I onboard people to the environment? How I move people into the environment? How people actually finish working in the company and I offboard them? Unfortunately, too many times we see cases where people start working in the environment. Later on, they moved on but they still have the escalated privileges because people don't have a mechanism to remove them. Or when people start working in the environment, and because there is no good playbooks, the information they're getting is the information or the credentials, or not the credentials, sorry, the profiles they're getting is the profiles that we copied from somebody else. It means they may get more credentials than they need. So the identity, the PIN part, is very, very important. Now we also have a PAM part, is all the passwords we're sharing, all the identities from API keys, the admin credentials, the credentials to network devices. How do I share them? Do I share them? You're probably not sharing them. We don't want shared credentials. We want to, as much as possible, to not use them. But we do want some kind of a vault when we can put our passwords that we need to use. We definitely want to use two-factor authentication, one of the important controls. Unfortunately, not every device supports two-factor authentication. So sometimes we do have shared credentials like root and admin that we definitely want to be there. But if you can avoid them, we want to create name credentials if possible. And we definitely want to make sure every user in the environment using two-factor authentication. And this is all part of the IAM strategy that involve all the sections we see here. And if you don't have two-factor authentication, multi-factor authentication, you definitely something you want to think about it. Now, there is a nice pairing between the network part and the IAM part, because I can do behavior. For example, if you connect from a device that I don't know you never connected there, I can I can actually prompt you for two-factor authentication. But I can also check not only two-factor authentication, but I can also check if your device is part of the domain, or maybe if your device have an antivirus installed, or EDR or EPP. So there is already a connection between the IAM, the network, the endpoint on the login part. This way, we are moving closer towards zero trust. Again, this is not about the zero trust architecture, but a lot of the pieces here are related to zero trust and what we call least privilege. So if you are not familiar with the IAM and what's happening in your environment, I definitely suggest to pay more attention. Understand your Active Directory. How often do you actually scan and see the privileged users in your Active Directory? How the admin making changes? Are they making changes from any device, or maybe from a workstation only? This way, if you work from home and your admins making changes from your laptop, doing the work from home, what if the bad guy is sitting on this laptop? They can piggyback. I always suggest people to not make changes from their own devices, to have jump box or workstation where they will need to log in, have additional credentials, and only there make the changes. It also minimize the network access, the firewall rules that you will need to create to access particular servers or devices to make the changes. In the beginning of the conversation, I mentioned about what do I do if I want to work from anywhere, and people actually work from anywhere right now. This is where Secure Access Service Edge come to. It's an evolution of Security Web Gateway, remote access, CASBs that help us to understand many things about the data, and of course, network SD-WAN. You also may heard expression called SSE from Gartner that came out in January, Secure Service Edge. The SSE part is just the security aspect of the SASE, but in a way, Secure Access Service Edge is the network security control to connect to the company and connect from outside the company. They take into account many controls we spoke about before. I want to explain about CASB because we spoke about Secure Web Gateway as part of the firewall. We spoke a bit about remote access, but we didn't really talk about CASB. And I'm sorry somebody is running outside, so I don't know if you hear the siren or not. I hope it disappears soon. CASB is an integrated part of the SASE architecture and the way we actually understand what's happening with our environment. The way it starts in the beginning is the shadow IT. Remember we spoke on application that's running in my environment, application I'm connecting into the environment. So in the beginning, I was able to take the list of all the applications from my secure web gateway, from my firewall, put it into the CASB, and it will tell me all the potential cloud applications that are running in my environment, and I can decide if I want to use them or not. Very quickly, the vendors realize I can use it inline, so using this on the firewall and the web gateway itself, to be able to stop an unwanted applications or unsanctioned applications. And they also realize what happened if I working from home, for example, I need to connect. Now this is the part that we still don't even really have connections and cloud-based firewalls and cloud security web gateway. I can use reverse proxy to connect it. Also, what happens if I connect to application like Dropbox, Office 365, OneDrive, where I cannot inspect in line? This is where API comes in, and I can use API-based scanning to scan the application for malware, DLP, potential permissions control. For example, if Evgeniy shared a file of all the customers with Scott, but instead of sharing with Scott only, it shared with everyone else in the world. This way, CASB were able to take this information and revoke access, for example. And the last one, is very, very popular right now, is the idea to connect to AWS, GCP, and Azure, what we call CSPM, to understand the permissions and what's happening in these environments to make sure we minimize how we create the connectivity, who can access to S3 buckets, what kind of permission is there, are we aligned with security frameworks. Something I didn't mention before, and I want to mention that with the Secure Service Edge, I have a way to use an agent or redirection to make sure you are always protected as an end user, or in the office or while you travel. If you take all this together, you will be able to see that SASE does replace a lot of the controls we spoke before. Not all of them, but quite a lot. Secure gateway, firewall, IDS, IPS, ZTNA. We still need EDR, APP, we still need vulnerability scanning, we still need anti-spam, and many other things, but at least there's quite a lot of consolidation under SASE. If you really want to know what's come under the SASE from the controls, here is quite a good list, so I'll let you just kind of look on this for a second. I'll have a drink. Okay, let's integrate everything together. So what I do. So one very, very important part, you probably heard about SIM. I can take all the information from all the devices I have, put the logs using syslog, using other mechanism, APIs as well, put it under SIM, and SIM will aggregate the events, do the magic, and help us understand what's happening. Widely deployed, a lot of companies use it, SOCs are use it as well. Very, very important part, because there is just no way for you, the security professional, to log into every device to understand what's happening. Also, with the millions of events happening, without the machine helping you to aggregate the information and give you a timeline when the packet or user moved on and what they did, you'll just be lost. It's just impossible to do it by hand. And this is why we also, of course, have some automation later on helping us with this. Another part that helps us to teach altogether is threat intelligence. Threat intelligence helps us to understand what's happening in the world and provide a smarter way for the SIEM or for the vendors to already identify bad guys. If I see an IP that's coming and attacking my environment, the threat intelligence part, the vendors, can help us understand if it's a bad IP, not a bad IP, and give us a lot of context right away. I usually divide it between three. There's vendors like the firewalls, the EDRs that have their own threat intelligence. There's companies that give us as well, and there's a SOC where I can actually consume the information as well. Now, with this information, I can do it proactively or I can do it reactively. Proactively, it means, for example, I can have the intelligence companies push the information to my SIEM, to my SOC, and every event that comes in, they already will enrich the event with the information. Will give more information. Or I can take an event, I can take a log or an incident and go to the TI companies, the intelligence companies, to their dashboard, and then do a research there about the event or about the IP or about the hash. Really different ways to work. Some customers don't want to enrich everything because it becomes very messy, very hard, and sometimes very expensive as well. And usually there is some enrichment happening, not for every traffic, and there's also some hunting or research going as well. And the more companies share this information about the threat intelligence they have, the more richer the information we get. In some cases, there's overlap, but in some cases, we can actually find the problem much faster, and it's basically time to resolution become much better. The other part that is also important is the user behavior. Remember how we spoke about NTA and BA when they can create a behavior on the network part? What if I not just take the network part? What if I take the cloud information? What if I take the user information? Now I can create behaviors. It's also, in my mind, a very big part of XDR, but again, I'm trying to avoid XDR right now. I think user behaviors are very important. We do see emerging in a way, majority of the UBA companies and vendors right now are same as well because there's a lot of similarity between them. SOAR is also an important part to integrate everything together. With the SOAR, with API connectivity to majority of the network, to majority of the endpoint, to majority of the vendors right now, I can actually share the intelligence faster. I can do investigation much faster. I can exchange information between the vendors. I can take an information from the EDR tool, and if I want to understand that there is something malicious going on, and I want to remove this device from the network, I can connect to Active Directory, I can connect to my DHCP and DNS, I can connect to my switching infrastructure, find where Evgeniy is connected, where is his MAC IP or MAC address, and remove Evgeniy from the network. And it all can be done automatically using the SOAR. Now, SOAR by itself is not fully magical. If you don't have a playbook that you used to do by hand, it will not do it for you, but it will help you to automate what you have right now. So SOARs are, in my mind, one of the important evolutions of the modern SOC as well. And I think majority of the SOCs will use SOARs to automate, be faster, this time to resolution part that I discussed about it before. You probably got very confused because there's so many things happening, and this is similar to like a bazaar because like, oh my God, there are so many tools. What do I do? Where do I start? How do I know what even beginning to? This way we have control frameworks. I think this is the way to understand how to understand the gaps, where to start. There's a number of them, of course. NIST is amazing. I like CIS as well. Of course, there's the Australian and the UK one as well, depending where you live. But using this framework, if you can use self-audit as well. You don't need to go externally and hire a company. By hiring a company, they will help you to understand more. But by audit yourself, what do you have? You can understand, okay, where is my gap right now? What is happening right now? And self-auditing, I think it's important, even if it's going to be hard for you to understand how to prioritize. At least you're going to have a good idea where you are. Majority of them are free to download, usually a humongous Excel file, or some of them it's a web interface, maybe going to be paid companies where they can take the framework and just help you to make them more beautiful and start doing this. This way you will see what to do, what's happening, and help you with layer approach to see what needs to be improved first. When you choose a new vendor, there's actually a process to take you there. And it's not just, oh, I have a gap here, I identify with NIST, CSF, all this is, and I'm right now really willing to buy a vendor that will help me with discovery of all my assets. There is a process how to avoid security theater, how to avoid an appliance that was sitting on a shelf, what we call shelfware. This is what I recommend to customers to do. If you have questions, I'm more than happy to connect with you later on to explain the process. Me and Dimitri built this like probably a year ago, and I think it's a very good process to understand what's happening from the vendor perspective. And it's almost agnostic to any vendors. It's just a process. Now, you don't stop there. You understand the gaps, you understand the tools. What do you do to actually make sure they are working correctly? This is where governments come. I think if you have a tool, you need to have some kind of regulations. You need to have some kind of process, repeatability. Who is in charge on what? Who need to do what? It's not just having an amazing tools and just run with them. You need to have a good tools and a process and the playbooks. How do you train a new employee? What do you do when a new person comes along? All these parts are very, very important. And you're not just buying tools, you're not just buying bells and whistles, and this is the latest sexy tool. The moment you get a tool, you need to understand how you're going to introduce it into the environment, what you will do that it will work good for you, correct for you. In some cases, you may need to hire an external party to help you with this as well. And then you create a process, how to do changes, how to repeat the process, how to do the escalations, who to escalate. It's not just having the fancy hammer, it's how do you use the fancy hammer. Because there's a lot of things you can do with the tools you have right now. Unfortunately, not everybody finishing the implementation and creating all the information there. And the last part I want to talk today is metrics. And I'm not going to talk more and give you examples, because even so there is universal metrics to see how well you're doing. I want you to think about this. If you want to make sure, for example, that your entire company is secure, and you know that you want to use EDR and EPP as one of the controls, and you should, then what's going to be the metric? The metric will be, is all of our machines actually have the EPP installed? If you have firewalls deployed, you want to understand, do you actually utilize the firewall to the full potential, or you have licenses unused, or you have any, and two any's probably, in the policies that allow people to do whatever they want, and there's no application policy. Or you have access to email outside, beside your main email security gateway, if it's on-prem, or DNS as well. So depending on the company, the metric may vary. And it's a separate presentation, separate chat, but when you have the tools, when you have the government, the next thing, all in the same time, what you build is the metrics. Thank you very much. It was my pleasure to talk to you today. I'm very passionate about this topic. It's a very important. There is a lot of tools. Well, in the world right now, more than 44,000 different vendors. There's a lot of different layers, a lot of different categories, and I wish you all the luck, and I was happy to be here. Thank you very much.
Okay, Evgeniy, thanks. That was a great presentation. Really appreciate all those insights. We do have some questions for you. The first one, of all the layers that you talked about, is there a layer that's most important to focus on first?
It's a good one. I'll probably start first from endpoint and firewalling. Firewalling a bit hard because we all kind of everywhere right now, but endpoint security is quite mandatory because everybody is everywhere. We all have our laptops, and a lot of endpoint products have the firewall capability or filtering capability and many other capabilities. So I'll definitely start from endpoint security.
Okay, super. Is there a layer that's sort of most frequently neglected in your experience?
I think it's not the layer. I think it's the finishing of the layer. For example, firewall, they put temporary rules. Endpoints, they put exclusions, but never review and remove them. Or they deploy them, but not fully deploy them. Vulnerability management, only scanning the PCI zones or the internal zones, or not scanning too often. So it's not the layer itself. I think it's more about finalizing and doing everything you need for the layer.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, that's a great point. You listed a lot of frameworks in your presentation, like NIST and CIS, and I'm sure the value varies by organization type and geography or vertical industry. But is there one of those frameworks that's your favorite or that you like to start from?
It definitely depends on the level and size of the company or enterprise. I personally like CIS because it's very simple and straightforward. You need an active scanning, you need a passive scanning. They actually tell you and guide you on what you need, and you can use what they put in a framework when you shopping for vendors, or ideally going to your existing vendors and asking, hey, Mr. Vendor, do you have such capability in the product I already have?
Okay. Another thing that you mentioned was tabletop exercises, which, I've seen those a lot in disaster recovery scenarios. Are there examples of tabletop exercises that you like to use or that you recommend, or focusing on specific types of incidents, like, I don't know,
Yeah,
ransomware or
definitely.
attempted
Yeah,
breaches?
definitely. Ransomware will be the most popular one because unfortunately this is one that's happening, and you want to simulate on what the company will do, have the correct people. But you can also do leak of information. We just found some of our information online. What are we doing? How do we respond? Oh, outage. Also, we just suffered an outage. How do we communicate it back to our customers? What happened and why it happened?
Okay. You also talked about the modern threat landscape. If we go back to that, what are you most concerned about right now? And especially when it comes to needing a layered defense.
Probably two. One is cloud. I mentioned CSPM as a part of CASB and SASE. Majority of companies right now developing and using cloud, like AWS, GCP, Azure. And unfortunately, we still see in the news this S3 bucket was exposed, this blurb in Azure was exposed, or information was not properly secure. So this attack vector is very important to cover. And there are so many different options you can have in the cloud to turn on and off that it's very hard for human eye to remember everything. The other one is the endpoint. Because we all traveling or working from home, or it's a hybrid environment, the attack vector to attack somebody from the home when they are at home, it's very popular. And it could be that you're doing a VPN full tunneling and somebody's on your device and piggybacking on you back to the environment. This is where ZTNA that we kind of brush and discuss about is important as well. And all the layers comes in there. If the endpoint security couldn't catch it, then the firewall or the remote access control will catch it, or the CASB will catch it as well. That's why we want a layered defense, because we want to make sure if one fail, we want to have indication from a different one, or user behavior, because the user behavior functionality or network behavior functionality, we're able to understand that Evgeniy is doing something abnormal for Evgeniy.
Well, Evgeniy, thanks so much. If there's one thing that you hope that people are going to take away from this talk about layered defense, what would that be?
Create a plan. Don't try to go and deploy everything you saw today in the presentation, because that's a lot of stuff. Create a plan, understand the overlapping between the vendors, how they connect to each other, and start execute. But don't jump on another sexy toy or sexy vendor you see that promises they're going to solve all your problems. Actually finish what you have right now. Make sure you deploy it. Make sure you have the governance for it. How is it going to, people going to working with it? And then start deploying the next one. I know it's hard because people always rush, but it's very important to actually finalize and document what you do for the company.
That's very sage advice. Really appreciate it. Well, thank you for being here.
Thank you. It was my pleasure. I'm very happy to be here and present, and I hope people find it valuable. If people have more questions, maybe later on, they know how to find me on LinkedIn as well. Thank you very much.
And before we wrap up, we do have one more piece of business. It's the $300 Amazon gift card prize drawing. And the winner of the $300 Amazon gift card is Patricia Brinker from California. So congratulations to Patricia. We'll be in touch to get you your card. And with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media, I want to thank our sponsors for making this event possible. Special thanks to CrowdStrike, Rubrik, Attack IQ, Duo, and Sequence. And thanks as always for attending and for your great questions. That concludes today's event. Have a fantastic rest of your day.